And this paint is about 22 years old, and this one is about 22 hours old. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Ed Gasket. Today's episode is all about finishing our Porsche 911 project. If you recall, I just removed the front bumper to pleasantly find that there is no structural damage after this 911 was recently in a small but significant front end collision. Now, of course, the same cannot be said about our front bumper, but that's why we're here. We're either exercising option A, which is repair, or option B, which is replacement. Now, of course, I've never done this before, but out of our best financial interest, we should at least give it a shot in repairing this bumper. And of course, if it doesn't go well, we'll just have to replace it. So the first best step before we get to a repair is to disassemble this bumper of all of its separate pieces so that we can give it a really good cleaning. So I let this thing dry out in the sun for about a half hour and brought it back in the workshop. You can see now, because of the abrasive cleaner and from the 3M Scotch-Brite, that this finish is much duller than it was beforehand. But my primary reason for using that product on this plastic before sanding is so that we could remove all of the contaminants. Because sanding this now will push those contaminants deeper in the plastic and will interfere with the quality adherence from the paint later on. So here's an up-close look of the area where we're going to be working. You can see this is sort of a peak of a defect, whereas these are both valleys. Now, valleys can be filled with body filler and then finished. But the peak, that's something we're going to have to fix. So I think what I'm going to do is take a heat gun, warm up this plastic, push this peak down so that it's more of a valley. Again, then we can treat all of these defects with body filler and then move on to the finish. So that actually worked out really well, and I'm super happy with the way that it feels. It's kind of hard to appreciate on camera, I understand, but believe me, before that was a high peak and now it's at least flat, if not a little bit depressed. So what we have to do now is rough up this surface with some sandpaper to give it a good adherence capability with our body filler. So next we'll do what I just said. So it took a few coats of that filler to get this nice smooth finish, but we finally achieved exactly what we were going for. Now it's time to hit it with 400 grit wet sanding sandpaper, and I want to use wet sanding paper because I don't want any of this dust to build up on the paper, cause it to clump, and then interfere with a nice smooth finish. It'll also help the paper last longer. Now once we're finished with sanding, we'll go outside, wash this thing with soapy water, let it dry, and in the meantime set up our paint gun to shoot some primer. Alright guys, I think the hard work is complete. The bumper repair is finished. Now it's time to simply lay down a few coats of primer, followed by a few coats of base coat, followed by a few coats of clear coat, followed by a wet sanding, a compounding, and of course a polishing, all hoping that this bumper matches the rest of our 911. Guys, sorry about not capturing any of the clear coating, but honestly I think you saw enough spraying for one episode, and I think my GoPro officially signed off for good. So if you have any camera recommendations, please leave them in the comments section below. Now the next step is to take our bumper here and eliminate all of the orange peel from the painting process, and that involves sanding and then of course compounding and polishing the bumper. Now rather than do it on the stand, as convenient as that would be for my back, I think the rigid nature of having the bumper mounted on the car will end with a nicer result rather than trying to work on it with the flimsiness of it resting on that stand. So let's get this bumper mounted back on the car and get working on that orange peel. So the bumper's back on, and although it looks really good from where you're standing, where Hudson is right now, he can certainly see all of the orange peel and even some areas where the clear coat ran. So I'm going to take some 1500 grit wet sanding paper and I'm going to sand the entire bumper. Now I'm not going to apply too much force, ow, and I'm also going to stay away from all of the edges because those are two ways that you'll burn through all of the clear coat and into your base coat, which means you'd effectively have to restart the whole project over again. So I'm going to avoid that at all costs. I'm going to wet sand this bumper and I'll meet you on the other side. You're biting my hand the whole time. So we're all finished with the wet sanding process on this bumper cover, and you can see that there's a dull finish to the paint now. And that's because we just sanded away all of the orange peel finish. Now this dull look is ready for a compounding and a polishing. Now, if you look closer, you'll see plenty of places that are still shiny and still have some orange peel. And that's okay, because those areas are really high risk for you to sand all the way through the clear coat into the base coat. Again, that would be disastrous. So I'm going to polish out this entire bumper and make it look really nice. So to start our compounding process, we're going to use a dual action sander. Now, I recommend one of these because it not only spins this direction, but the whole head moves around on the unit. And that makes it less likely that you'll end up keeping this tool in one position too long to burn a hole through the thin clear coat that's left behind. If you've noticed, this whole process is about making that car look really shiny without burning through the very thin layer of clear paint that's left behind on the bumper. We're going to start with Meguiar's Mirror Glaze, which is an ultra cutting compound, and we're going to put it upon a wool head on our DA polisher. Once we're finished with this, we'll use a polishing compound, and instead of the wool head, we'll use a foam one. Okay, so this is how the bumper looks just after compounding. We haven't even polished the bumper yet, but I'm starting to have second thoughts on polishing because this paint needs to look like this paint. And this paint is about 22 years old, and this one is about 22 hours old. So why should I polish this to make it look amazing if I can only polish this to make it look okay? So I'm going to hold off on polishing. I'm going to clean the whole car up, and then we'll talk about maybe compounding and polishing the rest of the car and then seeing if the paint matches. But I think it's about time for us to take our first drive in our Porsche 911. All right, so it's completely reasonable at this point to wonder why the heck I just dropped everything to take this car for its first drive. And I'll tell you what, I have a good reason. But first, let's start it. Hard to believe this is my first drive. I mean, what was that? Is that just the seatbelt noise? Yeah, okay. All good. Hard to believe I haven't driven this car yet. And the reason is, of course, the bumper's been off and I didn't want to drive it and potentially damage whatever important stuff is up front that's protected by the bumper. Reverse works. Of course, we already knew that reverse worked. We've backed up and gone forward a few times in the shop, but for all I know, second gear doesn't work, or third gear, or fourth gear for that matter. Damn. I don't have a button for the garage in this car, so give me a second. Let me shut the garage, and then of course, we'll get to the point of all this. All right, we're back. So the reason I dropped everything to take our car for the first test drive is because, like every auction vehicle, it showed up to my house. Ooh. Second gear. Works. It showed up to my house with a dead battery, which means the computer was completely empty of all of its diagnostic testing that it runs itself. Now, in Pennsylvania, our cars have to get inspected every year, and that requires, of course, that the computer has at least performed most of its diagnostic testing. So far, so good. I need to get it inspected in order to confirm with you that, of course, this is a good car. And I need to put about 50 miles on it before the computers run through all the diagnostic testing. So our job today is, of course, just to drive this thing. Now, sometimes it takes a few days to get a car inspected, so I want to get it into the shop as soon as possible so that they can get this thing turned over and back to us in time to, of course, report to you the findings. It's somewhat time sensitive, of course, getting the car over to the mechanic for the inspection. So I need to get these 50 miles under this car's belt as soon as possible, clean up the car, and then take it over to the mechanic. Now, of course, I expect to be a little bit more excited in driving a Porsche 911 for the first time. But to be quite honest with you guys, when you buy a car from an auction and you drive it for the first time, you just kind of expect that at some point the engine's gonna explode. Now, I'm not a car journalist, and I'm not gonna be really good at putting into words how fun this car is to drive. And that was a rotted deer carcass. But I just want to tell you that this thing is an absolute blast to be behind the wheel of. It's a really raw experience. And what I mean by that is every time I push on this gas pedal, it's like you can feel the effect in the shifter and in the steering wheel. The seats are like completely capturing of your back, not anything like my 2014 Jetta. And I, of course, can't diss that car. It's a really great car and it's super dependable, but that's more like driving a Toyota Camry, and this is more like driving a Porsche 911. My plans, of course, were always to buy, fix, and sell cars because it's a good time, it's a great hobby, and if done right, it can make you a few bucks, but most importantly, it's a really good time. But I could see having quite a hard time getting rid of this car. I definitely recommend this to anybody interested in buying an absolutely unnecessary $16,000 to $20,000 go-kart. Now, if you're finding yourself interested in this project and want to know the outcome of our vehicle inspection and of course see the remainder of our paint correction technique, be sure to subscribe to Ed Gasket, and in the meantime check out some other builds taking place in the garage. Be sure to hit up Ed Gasket Garage on Instagram if you want to see content updates on this and other vehicles between YouTube videos. Otherwise, guys, if you need us between now and our next video, as much as I want to say we'll be behind the wheel of this 911, we'll most likely be in the garage.